Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome to InnerViews, the podcast where we dive deep into the realms of therapy, healing, and intentional living. I'm your guide on this adventure, Ivory. Are you ready to embark on a transformative journey with me? Whether you're navigating the complexities of trauma, embracing intentional parenting, or seeking self-help strategies, this podcast is your sanctuary. InnerViews is not just a podcast, it's a community. A safe space where stories unfold and healing takes center stage. Your story matters. And here, courageous storytelling is the heartbeat of our existence. We'll be exploring powerful themes like healing, navigating the intricacies of foster care, the strength found in survival, the beauty of reclamation, and the pure bliss of joy. So if you're ready to join hands with a community that understands, subscribe now. Let's walk this path together because the journey toward understanding and well-being starts right here, right now. Welcome to InnerViews, where every step is a celebration of your resilience and a testament to the incredible strength within you. Let's make this journey unforgettable. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Ivory Bennett and I'm here today with Deborah Denzel. How are you, Deborah?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing super. I'm fantastic. I am manifesting a 2024 of joy and happiness. And I'm really excited for this conversation. Every conversation we have feels like a podcast, but you know what? Today's purposes, we're going to talk about healing, as we've done before, healing our trauma from being in the child welfare system. But specifically, we're going to emphasize the idea of reparenting, right? So, reclaiming one's childhood and one's childhood experiences and doing those things that we did not receive from the parental figures in our lives, whether that be biological, caregivers or others. So, I'm excited to go ahead and get started. If there's anything you need from me throughout this conversation, I'm here to offer that as well. But let's go ahead and dive in. So, reflecting on your journey through foster care and difficult parental relationships, how has the concept of reparenting played a role in shaping the person you are today? And can you share specific instances where you've consciously nurtured and cared for yourself in ways that might mirror the parenting you needed but didn't receive?
Alrighty, question number one. Great question. Um, yes. So I am 32 years old. I'll be 33 in less than a week, 2 weeks, 2 weeks.
Happy
And
birthday in advance.
yay, thank you. But I mentioned my age because around or in my 30th year on this planet Earth, the reparenting, I've had to approach the reparenting differently.
Mhm.
So up until 30 years old, I think my main focus, without consciously ever making this decision, was how do I achieve success, whatever that success looks like, right?
Yeah.
How do I get my basic needs met? How do I set myself up to be educated, to be informed, to
Mhm.
have a career, to do all of these different things that I noticed, I acknowledge wasn't provided, wasn't experienced by my family of origin, and kind of is what led to the poverty, led to the neglect, led to the removal, led to all this trauma. And so
Right.
I think I share this because I was so focused for so long on that. And I think also just that's kind of part of my personality, that I'm like this go-getter, and whatever I'm like stubborn. And so if I have a goal by any means necessary, that goal will be achieved,
Mm.
even if it negatively impacts my emotional
Mhm.
well-being.
That part.
So and
Oh,
so I never really felt it too much. I was able to just roll with it.
yeah.
Finishing high school, doing undergrad, doing some work, then doing grad school, and then doing some more work. Like I was able to just push, 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 push myself. But around 30 years old, I so the pandemic was just a couple years ago, and I recognized that I needed change, and I
Mhm.
had the privilege of having a nice little savings account, financial support. And I just was like, you know what? I'm going to take a break and I'm going to travel. And it was actually a decision, which we could be here all day talking about this, the how that all played out, because there was some trauma there. But the point is, I ended up doing a road trip, traveling the 50 states, and what that looked like, because I always had the goal of finishing visiting the 50 states before my 30th birthday. The pandemic hit, made me cancel trips. And so I turned it into a road trip. So here I am, living off of my savings, traveling the world through my car, staying at Airbnbs, spending lots of time in nature, out in the mountains, lots of hiking. The way my body went in shock and was just like, you're not go, 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 go anymore. You
Mm.
have time to think, 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 think. And so much caught up to me. And I was required to, I was required in terms of the expectations of society, right? I felt that pressure of like, what are you doing? Resting. Like you're supposed to be, being productive. You're supposed to be doing this. You're supposed to be doing that. And so society gives us those messages. And then I had the internal messages from my upbringing. And so, anyways, to end this point, what I'm trying to say is that during this time, I was forced to challenge a lot of thoughts. I was forced to redefine, success and the life I want to live and what do I want it to look like and what does healthy look like, and revisit a few things from my childhood, a few things, some trauma. And so I had to revisit some of that. And part of that process was me actually ending my lifelong relationship with my biological mother and brother. Part of that was ending other relationships. It was a very tough time, but it was needed. And in terms of reparenting, I am still working on this, but it was in that pivotal moment where I was forced to slow down. I was forced to think about these things, and I allowed myself to think about these things, that reparenting now looks like still accomplishing my goals because that's just who I am, but giving myself grace while I do it. And so if there's a change that happens, if I recognize, okay, you know what, this isn't a goal now, maybe this is a goal 5 years from now, or you know what, this goal is going to look differently, or I'm going to rest this week and I'm not going to work towards that. And I'm not all of these words you can throw in, right? These labels. I'm okay and I'm human. And so reparenting up until 30 looked one way, and now for the last couple of years it has looked a lot of different ways.
I resonate with that. I think that for me, a long time, like my inner parent voice, um, my mom's voice was still there because even though I was in foster care 17 years, I still lived with her intermittently for like a few months here and there.
Mm,
But I think my voice became because in my mind as a young child, it seemed like this was a great way for me to survive the experience. So that voice became academia, right?
mhm,
And when you think about academia, you can never achieve too much. You always want more. And that's what came to mind when you talked about if you have a goal, you're going to get it at any cost, right? And I think that that was plausible when we were college age. That was plausible when we were in our 20s, but we're in our 30s now. And I think for me, I've had to really, really, really reevaluate that voice of academia inside of me telling me to keep striving for more and for more and for more, especially as someone who worked in education and I got a master's degree and such too. It really made me confront my relationship with academia. And I think honestly, I've had to break up with academia. And I've had to say, you know what, this voice has to go away. This cannot be the way that I live. Um, And it feels incredibly radical because who am I without achieving success? Or at least success in terms of how society, Western society, paints it, right? Which would largely be financial, which would largely be external factors. So when I think about my own reparenting journey, it sounds very similar to what you just described as, coming to a crossroads and having to decide which path to take. And it doesn't mean that that path is going to be a consistent pace. It doesn't mean that that path is going to look like anything you've read in books or look like anything that's been told to you. But it's a decision that had to be made nonetheless. So thank you for.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think, listening to you speak, it reminds me, like, just to make the note that, and this shows up in so many areas of your life, right? Like, I have this perspective when it comes to um just different goals in life in general, not just a career, not just finance goals, but also like relationships, right? Like if I have a relationship with a friend or a partner or relative, this idea of like, no, like my goal, this relationship has to work, this relationship, and by any means necessary. And so it's like this approach I think that I've had for so long was I experienced in all aspects of my life. Like if there was a fitness goal I had, like, oh no, I'm going to achieve that. And I bring this up because I then recognize or I now recognize that part of that and part of wanting to achieve that wasn't just the reparenting and learning from, the adults in my life when I was younger, wanting to be different, but it has become part of my worth and the way that I view my worth.
Yes.
And
I was gonna
so,
say that. I was gonna say that what we're really talking to is our worthiness, right? And that childhood
yes,
desire to prove yourself as worthy of love and of attention and of consideration and of
yes.
consistency. All these things that you lack usually
Consistency.
when you're pulled into foster
Exactly. And if
care.
you don't, it's like, and I know for myself, like if I didn't achieve these things or if I gave up or changed my mind or, if I didn't, then it was like, well, I'm not worthy then.
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
not worthy. But yeah, now in the last couple of years, really working towards I am still worthy, even if I don't like even this week being off for the holidays, I had a list of things to get done and I was like beating myself up for it and had to constantly, it's still a journey of remind myself, you don't have to get all these things done. You're still worthy. If anything, you need to take half these things off your list. So it's still a
Mm.
work in progress. Okay.
It is, what's coming to mind? There's a Beyonce lyric, and she says, "You don't have to try so hard for me to love you." And
Mm.
that is one of the phrases that I repeat to myself often because it's like I have to constantly remind I don't have to be achieving anything, okay? I just transparently am the least ambitious I've ever been in my entire life. Like, I am tired, first of all. Secondly, I'm at a point in my journey where I am having to do that hard work of breaking up with my old patterns. And my old patterns told me to keep achieving, keep pushing yourself, even if it doesn't feel good, even if there are negative consequences. And I realized that's not really what needs to happen right now. What needs to happen is stillness. What needs to happen is alignment. What needs to happen is feeling feelings. That is not that is not my forte, but that needs to happen. That's a part of
No,
processing
buddy.
trauma. Oh, right. We could talk about that for probably a few days. We could have some workshops and seminars on that, but that's what needs to happen. And all of that is counterintuitive to this Western ideology of what it means to be successful. Continue driving yourself. There's always someone who's going to be better than you. So you have to work twice as hard to get half as much of your any kind of minority status, and of course, we're super marginalized people, just given so many different factors in our lives. And so in the back of my mind, I'm always considering that too. But I think it's time to try something different and something new. So let's go ahead and like kind of transition into this next idea though. So I think this is a really great space for us to define reparenting for our listeners. So reparenting is a noun. And it has two different definitions attached to it, and I can share this information in the show links. The first is a controversial therapeutic procedure used to provide a client with missed childhood experiences. The client, who typically has severe problems, is treated as a child or infant. For example, they may be fed with a spoon or bottle, hugged, sung to, and provided with other forms of nurturance. Reparenting has been unethically used to justify recreation of the birth process by wrapping a client in a blanket and having them struggle to get out. The second definition, which I think is more applicable to this conversation, in self help and some forms of counseling, a therapeutic technique in which individuals are urged to provide for themselves the kind of parenting attitudes or actions that their own parents did not provide. Um, do with that what you will. We're really focusing on the second definition here today. Um, you're too far for me to wrap you in a blanket right now, Deborah. But after hearing these definitions of reparenting, what does that kind of bring to mind? Because I think that a lot of people engage in the act of reparenting themselves, whether that be once they become parents themselves or when they just find themselves in the midst of their healing journeys and realize they need to redefine those voices in their head and realize they need to revisit childhood experiences that brought them joy or that they never were able to engage in, to give themselves an opportunity to play and to explore and to grow um, from that stage of development. So, what's going on in your mind? What are you thinking? What are you feeling?
So that's a great question. And so I think that I don't know when, at what point, and maybe it started at a young age. I'm really trying to think back, like how far back have I been doing this? I People look at me as an adventurous person. I look at myself as adventurous, and that can look like me always trying something new, something I've never been exposed to. I can have a friend who's like, "Hey, you want to go to this? I don't know, the most random thing." I'm like, "Of course. What is there that I don't want to try or do?"
Yeah.
And I think that, and I've always been like that. I think that is kind of some of that reparenting from trying new things, intentionally exposing myself to different things. And
Mhm.
then when it's something that I'm exposed to, because I recognize this reaction I have when it was just a couple years ago that I was exposed to hiking in the mountains because I grew up in the Northeast. We don't have all that. And it's, not common. And so a few years ago, I was exposed to hiking and I just fell in love with it. It is so therapeutic. Fell in love with it so much to the point where now I live on the West Coast, right? Because of the mountains. That's part of the reason. And
Mhm.
it's so therapeutic. And it's also tied into like, physical health, which is a goal of mine to maintain. And so, anyways, I think about these times where I expose myself to something and I'm just like, man, it's too bad as a kid I wasn't exposed to this earlier. I
Mhm.
wonder what this either activity could have done to me. Maybe it could have been a career of mine, or what this activity could have done. Maybe it could have helped me with better communication, or this activity, maybe it would help me find a hobby or a therapeutic, experience. Like, who knows? But I notice that I always have that response when it's something I'm exposed to and I just have this moment where I wish, or I wonder if I wish and wonder, like if I was exposed to a few of these things, so another example is just different physical activities. I noticed that I'm really competitive and I noticed that I have the personality to succeed in certain sports. And
Mhm.
I'm just like, man, if I was younger, I wonder if, there were some either biological family or foster families that exposed me to some of these sports. Like, man, I wonder I could have been in the Olympics. So I think that's what that brings up for me is like just thinking about as an adult how I continuously do that for myself. And then when I'm mentoring young people, especially with foster care experience, how I try my hardest. It's a value of mine and for all children, for
Mhm.
them to be exposed to just so much of the world, so much in our own backyards. because you just never know what that can spark for them, either in that moment or in the future. And that's just, yeah, something that I think about.
Yeah, when I think about self-nurturing, I think about all those things too, the exploration. Me and you both share a love for traveling. And I think that one of the reasons why I love traveling so much is because I never got to go anywhere as a kid. And so now I'm like, growing up, I have a passport and I'm like, oh my gosh, let's go to all the places on the globe. Let's spin it, put a finger, and let's go. And so, for me, I think that traveling is a way that I'm self-nurturing and reparenting myself, and it feels empowering as well. And also, this is one of my talking points in my advocacy work is giving myself the chance to play even at the age of 33. Right. And I talk also about how people who are currently caregivers or people who are currently in care need to find opportunities to allow people experiencing foster care and child welfare to play too. And that also means giving them chances to fail at things or giving them chances to decide that maybe they don't want to do it, but at least they got to try it one time. And I think that's the biggest difference. Being in foster care, there's a lot of things we don't get to try, a lot of experiences we just don't get to have, right? And that is an unfortunate thing. And I think that, like you said, there's so much untapped power and talent in people with lived experience of being in child welfare that if you don't do this work, when you're older and when you're safer, of trying to figure out, who your inner child was and what he or she or they needed, you might never know what's inside of you. You might never know what you love and what you like. You might never know what you don't love and don't like. But, you know, that is valuable information in terms of self-actualization. So, yeah, we could talk forever about that. All right, so next I want to talk about reparenting and often involves adopting new self-care practices and embracing supportive relationships. Dum dum dum. So, can you delve into the specific rituals or strategies you've incorporated into your life to provide the care and support you needed during your healing journey?
Great questions. um, Again, this some of this has looked the same from childhood or young adulthood, and some of it has changed. So for self-care, listen, I don't know who I thought I was at 16 years old, but I had a monthly membership for massages. Okay. I valued self care at a young age, but also your average 16-year-old isn't working a couple jobs. So I was working jobs. Very mature for my age, but I just laugh when I think back to that. But self care, I think about which there's some, there's ties to this idea of massages, right? There is we could have a whole session on massages, but when I think of self-care, I think about rituals that I have, such as getting massages, which is really helpful for my physical body. It's helpful for stress levels. It's helpful for touch, which is tied into, actual interpersonal relationships that you may have or may not have.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, I do massages. Um, I try to make sure that I'm connected to earth. And so
Mm.
that looks like me making sure that I get sunshine, that I get my body moving and at least walking. Like, and it's something I still try to make sure I incorporate. And it's easy to get in the flow of life and neglect some of those things. But then my body reminds me, hold on now. You don't have the best mood, or you're not feeling the best physically. And I go on a walk, I get some sunshine, the ocean, connecting to the ocean, connecting to the mountains. Like, truly nowadays, my self-care is so many basic things. Even self-care is eating healthy foods, eating
Mhm.
fruits and vegetables, and drinking water. Like, the most basic things is self-care. And I think I've had the privilege and blessing of learning that and finding those things. And so, and some people don't. And they may result in not healing themselves, or they
Right.
may result in using other things to feel better, right? But yeah, self-care is going back to some of those basics. And then the other piece of this is uh In terms of relationships, I think part so much you could say about relationships. I think having them is important, and that's part of self-care. I think developing relationships and learning how to have healthy relationships is part of self-care, part of reparenting, especially if you come from a background where you didn't see conflict resolution, you didn't see healthy coping mechanisms, you didn't see healthy, communication patterns. If you didn't see any of that, and luckily I think part of this is my education and my career that has informed me of some of these things. But yeah, when it comes to relationships, I think having healthy relationships, having healthy conversations, especially around conflict, and knowing when a relationship, a season of a relationship is over. And if you need to move on, you move on in a healthy way. Like all of that to me, and having those boundaries in relationships, that is self care. And the last piece to it, though, it's also, which is, I think, the most uncomfortable part for me and for people like us, is like that vulnerability. Um, Having relationships where you can rely on people, depend on people, trust people, um, share your thoughts and feelings with people, even those thoughts and feelings that make you really uncomfortable or make you afraid or you don't want to face, right? Because it can result in some beautiful relationships. It can result in some beautiful healing. Um, and so I think that, and the last comment I'll make about this is I have had experiences as an adult, even recently, as of the last couple of days or weeks, where finding, okay, having those boundaries and not having those relationships in your life that are triggering or toxic or not healthy, not having those is self-care, is self-love, is healing, but also embracing and searching and having those healthy relationships. So yeah, I can, have lots of examples where there's friends, there's families of friends who have embraced me, who have loved me, who have accepted me and provided me a sense of belonging that like I've just always yearned for. And even now, as who I am with the education and the knowledge of all of this, still struggle sometimes of like, oh, I don't know if I want to be vulnerable and be in this space or accept this love or do this thing. And I try to challenge myself to embrace it because I'm worthy of that. And at the end of the day, it could just be such a healing and beautiful experience. So I know that was a lot, but I think that answered your question.
Yeah, you did. And I think that one of the motivations behind asking this is to really emphasize the importance of when you think about a holistic healing journey, and I tend to think about things holistically in general in my own life, so I'm biased in that regard. But when you really think about the totality of healing and the healing experience, it can't happen without healthy relationships too. And I think that as people who have lived experience in foster care, we tend to deprioritize relationships because we haven't seen examples of healthy conflict resolution, because we don't know how to communicate effectively, because we've experienced trauma and abuse and neglect. And so we might do the healing work. Let's say we're avid gym goers or we do eat healthy, but it's also confronting your relational health with others. It's also confronting how you show up in relationship, whether it be personally, professionally, some weird combination of the two. Um, and then the other part of this specific point in the conversation is that a lot of us ended up in foster care because our parents did not have healthy daily rituals to take care of themselves. They did not have self care routines that were able to support and empower them to show up as parents, right? And so just keeping that in mind, everything is tied together. So, in the process of reparenting, building connections and fostering understandings with others is pivotal. How has your journey influenced your approach to forming and maintaining relationships? And I think you kind of already started talking about this and touching on this. And are there lessons from your experience that you believe can guide others in their own reparenting efforts. And this is in the context of we're 33 now, right? We're elders. We're old in the world of child welfare. We're very old. We're like mysteriously ancient as Rafiki and the Lion King. Right? So, what would you have to offer those behind us? And I'm sure this is going to shift and change as we grow and mature too throughout our lives. But at this point in the journey, what would you offer people with lived experience about building connections and fostering understandings and relationships? And it doesn't have to be just personal, it can be professional, it can be romantically, it can be in other regards. But what advice do you have for people out there?
I think this is a great question. And I think what I'll share is just a couple tips. So if we have, any listeners who are young people who they might be able to benefit from this, or maybe they're struggling in this area and they might be able to benefit from this. Um, yeah, so I think a couple different things. I think one is not expecting everything from one person. I think I've spent quite a bit of time expecting everything from one person, whether that is a relative, that is a new friend, that it's a partner. I think that what's really healthy is that when you have people in your life and who align with your morals, values, right? They're a good person. They're someone in your life that you can like intentionally having people in your life and not cutting people out because there can be something that you can get out of that relationship and that you can provide that person. Um, and so I have friends in my life who are in their 70s. I have friends in my life who, and when I say friends, I have people, either friends or associates or these meaningful relationships that can range from a really young person to a really much older and wise person and all in between. And I think that I've learned over the years that there are things that they can offer you that you wouldn't have known if you just kind of wrote them off. And so having a diverse set of people in your life who can give you a diverse set of opinions that you can provide, a relationship to as well is one point to this. Um, I think going back to that vulnerability discussion, I think that continuing to protect yourself while being vulnerable is really important. And that goes into kind of what we discussed around communication and learning effective, ways to have difficult conversations and all of that because it's actually like when I think about deep relationships in my life, those are the relationships that I had to be vulnerable and I had to share, and have challenging conversations with. And I've had, there's relationships in my life where I've had to say, you know what? I'm kind of sad that we're not closer than I would like us to be. Or I'm kind of sad that you didn't show up for me in this way. Or I'm kind of upset that, A, B, or C. And then we're able to have a conversation, and rather than me, my natural state of mind is like, you don't care about me or you don't love me or it's about me or any of that, we're able to have a conversation and I'm able to learn actually their experience is causing them to respond this way, or their experience or what they're going through right now. And it has nothing to do with me. And they had no idea that I was feeling this way or I needed this thing. And so it was through those conversations that I was able to challenge my own beliefs, my own, internal trauma. And a lot of that is vulnerable because as former foster youth or current foster youth, we oftentimes don't get our needs met and we have to rely on ourselves. And trust me, I get it. Like I think it, and I still struggle in this area, but yeah, I just think that, not losing hope and really finding your people and finding those people who will love you and care for you the way you need them to is just such a beautiful feeling. And being open, the last comment I'll say is just being open to seasons. And that's something recently I've had to process as well. If I was close to someone, whether it was a friend from school or a childhood friend or a friend from a job, I would do a phenomenal A+ job of maintaining those relationships. I wanted to hold on to them as I move forward to different seasons in my life, whether it's transitioning and moving to a new area, or it's transitioning and leaving school, but starting a job, whatever that transition might be. I would hold on to these relationships. And when these people wouldn't show up for me the way they previously had or the way I needed them to now in this new season of my life, I would just be so sad and take it so personal. And I have figured out how to still love them and appreciate them for the season that they were in my life, and not to hold any grudges and not take it personal, and just recognize that. And not everyone goes with you to your new seasons, and you don't go with everyone to their new seasons in their life. But it doesn't mean that they maybe the relationship might look differently, or they might come back in a new season of your life. So I think it's like figuring out those relationships, being open to those relationships, and also being okay when some of those relationships end. Again, because of our upbringing, because of the disruptions we've had, it's really hard to accept that. But I think it's a great way and a healthy way to appreciate those and to learn from those, and just keep along in the journey.
That's what I would share. And all of that is so much easier when you are actively engaged in therapy, because then you can get that non-biased support from your provider to guide you through having to learn discernment, like what relationships are healthy and good for you and which ones are not. And they can walk you through the process of, let's say you've realized a person is here for only a season. There's a saying, people come into your life for moments, for seasons, and for lifetimes. There are far more moments than there are seasons, and there are far more seasons than there are lifetimes. So having that understanding, but also the discernment to go along with that, is paramount in this process. But again, if you grew up in foster care, it's likely that no one ever walked you through that or taught you that. And so that's something you have to learn on your own. But it is so much easier when you have a therapist or a mental health coach or professional to help you along the way. Two things that I would love to share with our readers too, our listeners rather. I mean, hey, maybe we'll manifest a book to go along with this podcast. The first is time does not heal all. So communication is important. I think it's important to communicate with people the expectations that you have in those relationships, right? And be very clear and very specific as to what you need. So perhaps you have a relationship with someone who started out in academia and college, right? Maybe your expectations for that relationship are mentorship. Be explicit about that. Ask for that. And if they can offer that, they'll offer that. If they can't offer that, they'll communicate that to you too. It doesn't necessarily have to mean the end of that relationship, but it's a very clear understanding of what that relationship is. And then the second thing is, this is for you young ones out there. Don't take advice from people whose lives you don't want to live. Okay? Do not listen to someone's advice if their house is on fire constantly, all the time. If what they have is not appealing to you, if what they have is not healthy and exciting, you probably don't want to listen to what they have to say. And it doesn't mean that everyone cannot be a teacher. Everyone can absolutely be a teacher to you. But perhaps the way that they're living their lives is not really conducive to your own success and happiness and healing and joy. Last but not least, so embarking on this journey of reparenting involves continuous self discovery. Can you share transformative moments or realizations that have been instrumental in your ongoing process of nurturing and caring for yourself? How has this journey shaped your vision for your future and your aspirations for the type of parent you aim to be yourself?
Whew, that's a good one. All right. Do you have something you want to share first while I still kind of brainstorm?
Yeah, let me give you a few moments of percolate on that. I can definitely share. So, as I've shared with you before, this last year, 2023, was the second worst year of my entire life. Only second to the year that my mother almost died when I was a sophomore at the University of Pittsburgh. It was just an incredibly difficult year, full of very deeply traumatic events, from the death of like my father figure to being laid off from my really great job with really great benefits and salary, to moving across the country temporarily, just a bunch of things that are not ideal. and that no matter what, no matter how hard you go in the paint, they're unavoidable as well. And so last year was a really difficult year, but I think that in saying that, the reparenting aspect of my experience of 2023 really had me confront the idea of success. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? And how do I treat myself when I feel unsuccessful? How do I treat myself when I feel like I'm failing? Right. And when we think about the reparenting aspect, that has to do a lot for me with the internal dialogue I have. Remember to the beginning of our conversation how I said that one of my biggest parental voices in my mind was really higher academia. When I was in high school, I was recruited by all these Ivy Leagues. They dumped me. They didn't invite me to attend their schools, but they invited me to apply. And I went through the whole process, long story short, that was really difficult for me to cope with. Um, but that has been guiding me kind of through the majority of my 20s. How can I achieve? How can I achieve? How can I achieve? And so to experience all the loss that I experienced last year, the mourning, the grief, really, what that brings up, had me really confront what does it mean to be successful? Who am I without that conventional success? How can I find joy in the midst of that? And not only that, but in the midst of severe adversity, in the midst of severe grief, in the midst of severe loss. Because life is lifing and it will always continue to life. And there will be years that you're up, there will be years that you're down, and there will be a lot of years in the middle of all of that too. So when I think about my continuous self discovery journey, it was really me getting comfortable with failure. It was me breaking up with this idea that in order for me to be worthy, I had to be successful in terms of how Western society, a capitalist driven society, deems that. And so reclaiming that and redefining that for me, and also recreating the internal neurologue, the internal monologues that I have going on for myself when I'm having certain experiences, speaking to myself more gently, giving myself grace and allowing myself to exist outside of the rat race of how can I climb to the top the fastest and how can I be the best in all circumstances? What does it mean when I'm not doing those things? Do I not have worth? I know that I have worth logically, right? But what does it mean to unpack that? So that's been a really, really big part of my self-nurturing, self-caring journey. And who knows what 2024 has in store? It's only a few days in and we have a lot of weird stuff that's already happened. I don't know if you've been watching the news or paying attention to some things, but it's looking like this year is going to be really interesting. But when I really think about reparenting and that continuous self discovery journey, how am I speaking to myself when no one's around? How am I speaking to myself when I'm laying down in bed at night thinking about everything that's happened throughout my day? And how do I show up and give myself grace and compassion and patience in the midst of what seemingly feels like failure or what seemingly doesn't feel successful? Um, so yeah, and in terms of becoming a mommy one day, I am really excited. I was talking to my therapist actually. I talk to her every week. I was talking to her about before Christmas break though, because everyone needs a break, right? And she told me, she was like, I'm really proud of you because a lot of people who had the experiences that you had of being in foster care and all the parental figures that you had, all the experiences of neglect and abuse that you went through, you still want to become a mother. You still are excited about that. And I didn't realize that I guess there are a lot of people with our lived experiences who are afraid of parenthood and who are afraid of what that looks like and what that means. Um, so I had to give myself, a little pat on the back. And when I think about the kind of parent that I want to become, this is something that I'm reparenting myself in now, is learning how to celebrate the wins, no matter how big or how small they are. So that is a moment for celebration that I can have that resilience and still want to show up and nurture and mother other people, not bringing in my fear of abandonment, my fear of neglect, my fear of abuse into my future children's lives. And also, making really good decisions before they get here. I think that one of the things about deciding to become a parent is you're a parent well before your children exist. And so, how am I preparing myself and my life to make space to be the kind of soft, nurturing, loving, guiding, affirming parent who can prepare people to be self actualized, but also to show up in the world in a way that makes it a better place, not at the detriment of themselves but at the use of their skills and their talents and their gifts. How can I create a life that allows them to be aligned with that so that they can go out and add some razzle dazzle to this big wide world? So That's where I am in terms of my continuous self-discovery journey of reparenting and preparing to be a parent. Where might you be?
If listeners could see my head, they would be like, dang, she is shaking that head a lot, often, continuously, because I'm just like, yes, yes. And I know listeners, can see that we're on the same page with a lot of this. Um, and so I can really relate to this idea of just continuously learning to like redefine things and giving ourselves grace. Like I relate to that on so many levels. Um, and the only thing I would add, to that is just I think where I'm at and where I've been and I hope to continue to be is curious and
Mm,
just constantly having curiosity and not being necessarily stuck in my ways. Like if there's a healthier way to do anything, I want to know because ultimately I want to be the best, healthiest version of Deborah, of myself. Um, and so, that could continuously look different. And while I am stubborn and hard-headed and in a lot of ways, I think growth I am not. Um, and so I think I would add that. And in terms of parenting, so I, when I think about parenting, what comes first for me is fostering teenagers. Like that's always been my thing. I feel like the older I get, the more I become, firm and I want to do that. I'm
mhm,
open to having biological children and creating a family. But I think for me, that's under circumstances of being able to develop a family unit and having
mm,
a partner involved. Um, but I share all this because I think my reasoning for wanting to foster teenagers comes from the need that exists because so many prospective foster parents are afraid. Older children are stigmatized and they have this perception of what older children are, and I know well aware that that's not the case. There's so many beautiful, amazing children in our system who deserve, I mean, all of our children deserve, but this idea that our older kids, are too troubled or too this or too that or too old. No. So I'm just so ready and I'm excited to use my lived experience, but also my professional experience and knowledge to be able to provide a safe and loving, accepting, belonging home to teenagers where they can, flourish and become young adults and hopefully experience some healing. And so that's my vision for parenting, the future for parenting. And hopefully, if I have biological children of my own, I can create an environment for them in that way as well. But yeah, that's those are my thoughts.
that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And also, you don't have to be a parent, right? Like, if that's not something that you see for yourself, that's absolutely okay too, for those who are listening out there. So thank you so much. I'm just always so grateful for the chance to talk to people about their lived experiences. I think that it's one of the best ways to learn about life and about the world around us and to learn about ourselves as well. So I want to leave us with one thing, our empowering moment of today, a culmination of our conversation. Because I exist, so does my healing and my joy. Because I exist, so does my healing and my joy. I hope that y'all have been able to take something healing from this conversation. If you want to get in touch with either one of us, please feel free to do so. And we look forward to hearing from you. If there's something you want us to talk about, please let us know as well. And we hope you have a wonderful day. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.
The InnerViews podcast is a production of the Safe Camp Audio Network, which is a division of Fostering Media Connections via Youth Voices Rising. Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web or Safe Camp Audio on all major social media. This podcast is produced and mixed by Daniel Mitchell. If you enjoyed this episode,
We'd love it if you consider sharing, subscribing, and or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcast.